You're listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, hosted by Aaron Walker and Heather Dyer. Tune in weekly to get inspired and make good food.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, Aaron.
We're back. We're here at Three Kitchens Podcast, talking to each other, and
Not just us.
we have our second guest of the season, and we are really excited to welcome him to the podcast. His name is Chris De La Rosa.
He is the guy behind CaribbeanPot.com. You may have even heard of him because he is a very popular food blogger, YouTube, cooking. I was going to say star, but honestly, he's well known for spreading Caribbean culture and cooking to the masses, to the world.
And he's been doing it a long time.
Since 2009, so he knows what he's doing. And he's self-taught, self-taught at the apron strings of his family. And he wanted to share Caribbean food with his family, first of all, his kids. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of took off, and he now makes it available to all of us to learn about Caribbean cooking.
Yeah. So he is originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and he is a fellow Canadian with us. Woo! Canadian content! So he's over in Hamilton, Ontario. You just have to see what he's making. It will make your mouth water.
Yeah, this has been an aspiration for us for a while to have him on the show because his food just looks so delicious. And yet it's not something that we ourselves were very familiar with. So we invited him to come and teach us just a little bit. I mean, there's so much to know about Caribbean cooking that this is just a small little piece of it. But we hope that everyone else learns a little bit from it as we did, because I mean, it's delicious food and interesting history. And Chris is just such a wonderful teacher of it. We did make a recipe.
We did.
Chicken pelau, which is a rice dish.
Yeah, we kind of got that classic one pot rice dish.
Well, this is Chris's take on it. He will tell us that it varies. Different islands in the Caribbean might do things a little bit differently, and you can all fight out who does it the best. But we're making Chris's version of it, and it's really delicious and not difficult. So we're here to tell you, as this being our first real Caribbean recipe that we tried, we recommend it. And we know you can make it too if this is something that's completely new to you. We had a few takeaways, but one of them was we were a little, and we talk about this with Chris, we were a little scared of the spice. Listen, when someone says Scotch bonnet pepper, that sounds scary to us.
Terrifying.
And if you're feeling the same, we know lots of people out there are like, whatever, I eat those all the time. But if you're like us and you're like, oh, that sounds like a lot, just go for it. In hindsight, we wish we'd just gone for it. So we're here to tell you, learn from our experience, put the pepper in, do it Chris's way, and you're gonna love it.
And we learned a new technique when we initially cooked the chicken. You put sugar in oil and you let it melt and brown before you add in your chicken. And when we did this, when we made the chicken pilau, I think we were a little bit timid and afraid to burn the sugar, because he says, don't let it burn. If you burn it, you got to start over again.
Wash it. Yeah, exactly.
So we were a little bit shy when it came to getting that sugar to melt and brown. And so I went back, and I've already now made the rib pilau as well, where he takes a rack of pork ribs and you chop them up, make this rice dish as well. And it's got different seasonings, different flavors. With my sugar and oil browning technique, I think I got it much better second time around. It takes quite a while. You put your brown sugar in that oil, you heat it up, and you sit there and wait for it, and it actually does melt and become a liquid. And then they'll start to bubble and froth, and that's when you want to add in your meat.
Yeah, that's a good tip. And I think Chris would say, if he'd been looking at our original chicken pilau, he would have said it needed a tan. It needed a suntan.
Yeah.
We've learned, Chris. We learned And now on, we're going to do that better. But it was still delicious. So,
Yeah.
just try. All you can do is try. I mean, that's what we're always saying. And that's what we're here to
Yeah.
promote.
And chicken pilau,
Mm.
yum. The rib pilau, yum.
Did you have a favorite of the two?
That's a tough question. I really liked both of them, and they were very different. The chicken pilau had more of a curry seasoning and spice mixture in it, whereas this rib pilau was a lot different. It didn't have the curry powder in that. And so I don't know. I liked both of them. They both were really good. The family loved the flavors in both of these. They're for sure going to get mixed into our regular
rotation.
Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. So we were so into our conversation that we kind of started before we even hit record. We started chatting with Chris, and then we were like, oh, we better start recording this episode. So it feels a bit like we just jumped right in, but that's because we were already chit-chatting away and having a great conversation. So please join us, listener, in welcoming Chris De La Rosa from Caribbean Pot to Three Kitchens Podcast. We're so happy to have him here with us on the show, and we hope you enjoy this conversation.
This is something that Heather and I have been looking at for a while. We've been following you through social media and really interested in what's happening in your kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Probably it's a testament to the way that I deliver it and the sort of notion that a lot of people around the world don't know much about Caribbean cuisine, especially that and the history behind it. And we spoke about this earlier. The last time we spoke, that it is a representation of everyone who has colonized us over the years, along with the native people, probably the correct term to use. And then we had after slavery, we don't want to ignore slavery. It did happen 300 years in the Caribbean, and most of the slaves would have been brought from West Africa. After slavery was over, it would have been, I think, around the 1830s, I think, there was a shortage of labor in the Caribbean for the sugarcane fields, where in America, slavery was all about the cotton. It was about sugar in the Caribbean. And there was a shortage of labor because the slaves were free and they didn't want to go back to work. So in 1938, around there, East Indians were brought across from India under the sort of the term the British were comfortable using was indentured laborers. It was just another way of having not to use the word slavery. Around the same time, they brought Chinese indentured laborers as well to facilitate the shortage of labor. So, and only recently there was a huge argument / debate on Twitter. It's no longer called Twitter, it's called X, I think it is, or whatever.
Yeah.
Within the islands, who makes the better food? Like, which island has the better
of
food?
course.
And banter going back and forth. And someone mentioned that food from Trinidad and Tobago is just repackaged food from India. We took it and repackaged it. But it goes much deeper than that, because over the years, that same food from India, that influence would have evolved, not just the taste and likes and dislikes of Caribbean people, but also the ingredients that we would have had available. So picture 1838, Indians came to the Caribbean. They brought a little bit of everything, maybe some seeds and whatever to plant, but they wouldn't have had access to everything. So that is where the change started happening. So repackage, I think it was a bit of a rude way of putting it, and a bit of a shallow way of putting it. But you would see, throughout the Caribbean, and I tell people, some of the best Chinese food you'll ever have is out of the Caribbean. It would have been like Cuba, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana. All those places that's where the Chinese would have been brought in big numbers. Same as with the East Indians as well, too. So I'm thankful because I grew up eating really good food, and not just good food, but good vegan food as well. Because let's face it, the majority of East Indians that were relocated to the Caribbean were vegetarians.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we would, traditionally we would cook and make 20 different dishes with those same ingredients. And I'm telling you, really tasty stuff. We don't need to replicate a burger. If we're vegan or vegetarian, we treat the ingredient as such. So maybe another time we can talk about that a bit
that
deeper.
is interesting.
A bit deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you yourself learn to cook?
You know, when you're surrounded by people who are great cooks, my mother, my father, growing up in a small village in Trinidad and Tobago, just about everyone cooked. There was always someone home as well, whether it's your mom, your granny, or your aunt, whoever you lived with. And then most time it was that female figure. Being surrounded by people who know how to cook made it easy. Now, here's the thing. One of the things we have in the Caribbean, and this is old school, and I don't know if it still exists, but as a child growing up, you're always told when adults are having a conversation, you need to keep out of it. When adults are doing something, you need to keep out of it. My parents never did that to us. We knew our place. When mommy was cooking, we'd be looking around and when is it going to be done? We could tell. And you know, today, if my daughters came into the kitchen, they will just look where we at, what's going on in the pot, and they'll be like, oh, 10 more minutes? Yeah, 10 more minutes. They know. And that is how.
Yeah.
And that is the sort of the key to things is my mom never kept us away from the kitchen or being part of it. One of the stories I tell people is that Sunday lunch in Trinidad and Tobago is the biggest meal of the week. Your family come over and you cook a lot of stuff, and it's usually ended with homemade ice cream. The night before, which is the Saturday night, we would have that freshly butchered chicken or whatever protein we were using. Mommy would season it and put it in the fridge to marinate overnight. My job as a little fella was to go in the backyard and pick the herbs she would use. So that's how she got us involved. I would pick the herbs, bring it back, and then she would chop it up or blend it. And you saw the Caribbean green seasoning that I did there. That's an integral part of things. And it wasn't just getting the herbs and her seasoning and stuff like that. After it was done seasoning, I love smelling. And she would, you know, like there's a big bowl of chicken or whatever ready to go into the fridge to marinate, and I would go and I would smell, and I'd be like, oh man, that fresh thyme and the ginger and the garlic and everything else that was in there. That you know, to this day I still do it, and from time to time you would see my daughters do it. And now I've introduced Zaire to it. He's 2.5, but he's like, daddy smell. He wants to smell it as well too. He wants to be part of that. That is where it started, and it was fostered by my parents. Then I moved to Canada, late 80s, early 90s, I think, somewhere around there. I lived with my aunt, and she had 2 younger children. My aunt worked 2 jobs. I was in school, and my 2 cousins were in school as well. At one point, my sister lived with us. My sister came here before I did. And typical immigrant story, you work 2 jobs to make ends meet and stuff like that. And it was my job during the week to make something for myself and my cousins to eat. Mind you, many days that was bologna sandwiches. But after living with my aunt for a couple of years, I had a girlfriend, started my own family, and I started cooking even more because I love to eat, and it shows. You know, I'm a big fella. That's where this part of things, the whole CaribbeanPot.com, came into play, because it started in the, I would say, 94, 95, somewhere there, cooking for my daughters who were just born and stuff like that. And that just grew. I knew at some point they would be heading off to university and all that. And while we have a deep tradition of good food in the Caribbean, it is like with most old cultures, it was never documented. There was never any cookbooks. There was never anything written. Some people may have their own personal cookbooks at home that they would write down and stuff like that, but there was nothing available for me to go and purchase and say, well, take this with you to university or college or whatever it is. My background in internet marketing consulting means I knew a lot about search engine optimization and all, how to build a website and how to make it popular. It was never meant to be anything for anyone other than my daughters. But because of the work I did, it then became a global thing. Everybody was finding the website. And at that point, maybe a couple of years after 2009, somewhere around there, I started doing video and social media and stuff like that. So technically, you know, if you really look deep into it, I was the first one to have started the whole Caribbean thing online. A lot of people have come after. And after a while, it became my full-time gig. I no longer do consulting and stuff like that. And it's all about food right now.
Wow, that's great. That's amazing. When you stop and think about how food recipes, methods have been handed down as an oral tradition in many cultures, it's incredible how that survives generation after generation when it isn't documented. Nobody's writing it down.
Yeah.
I don't know, it speaks to that community that comes around food and the comfort we get from those familiar dishes and what our grannies made for us, or what your mom made that you loved, and so you want to recreate it. I think it's amazing that you're now making this, not just for your kids, but for everyone now, to learn all these wonderful foods that you grew up on.
Yeah, there is a side to that whole oral thing. Yes, it's great that it's passed on orally, and we have that tradition over the years, but I have noticed a lot of it is getting lost because we don't have these oral conversations anymore. It's a text, it's a 30-second video or something like that. And it's not just now, it's been a number of years now. I'll share a story with you. I had someone contact me and she said, Mommy passed away and I always try to cook for Daddy, but I struggle and I can't remember the dish that she made from my website. And she said, Daddy sat there and he cried because it reminded him of not only what my mom used to cook for him, but what his mother used to cook for him as well. It tasted the same. So that sort of gap that's there where that oral thing didn't connect, that is what I'm trying to connect. So you're right, by having the recipes, and maybe dumb is the wrong word to use, but I try to dumb it down where there's a full list of ingredients, specifically how much of each item you'll need. Because today, Heather, if I were to call Mommy and I say, Mommy, how do I make whatever it is? Well, son, in her little Trinbagonian accent, well, son, when I make it, I put a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And don't forget, you might want to taste it. I put a little bit more. And, that's just the conversations we have. Her generation never wrote things down to pass it on. So having the ingredient list, step-by-step pictures, the description to go with each picture. So you're following along. Plus, at the very end of my post on CaribbeanPot.com, you will see a video. So you have all these tools to make things as easy as possible for you. And I give people substitutes. And I try to make that sort of connection to other ingredients you can substitute if you cannot find something. Because at the end of the day, I shop at the same grocery store you guys shop at for the most part. The ingredients are all there. It's just the technique is going to be different.
I love that you're talking about substitutions, because it's very common when it's a cuisine you're not familiar with to look at a list of ingredients, especially when it looks like a very long list.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, okay, first of all, this looks complicated right away because there's so many things. And then it looks like, okay, I've already seen a couple things. I don't know what they are. I probably can't make this. So when you can right away offer, if you can't find this, use that. Or leave it out.
Yeah.
It's okay to just try it, right? We often, when we do recipes, we come across that all the time where you'll hear us talk about, well, I couldn't find this, so I looked it up and I tried substituting that, or I just left it out and we tried it anyways. It makes it more accessible to all the rest of us who aren't as familiar with it, right?
Yeah, and that is, if you look at my recipes as well, I also put in brackets sometimes optional. Yeah, if you have it, perfect, use it. If you can't, because I know some things are just impossible to source. Some things I grow myself in my backyard. Some things I go to specialty stores for. But I don't want that to be the hindrance for you not to try something new or something different. The problem I have is the size of stuff that they sell, like especially spices. That's what I'm getting at. I don't want you buying a whole big package of something, a spice that you may only use once or twice. Erin spoke earlier about the Caribbean green seasoning. Until I spoke to you all and we spoke about pelau and making it, I'm like, I've never done a recipe where it's a small batch. Every batch I've done is a big batch. But what about the person who just entry into Caribbean food, or the single person, or the person who's at university and they just want to cook something, but they need that Caribbean green seasoning? But the one that I made most recently, because of from the influence from you guys, is it's maybe about a cup or 2 cups, maybe a cup and a half maximum. No, that will last in the fridge for 3 months. But the point is, you don't have this 1 liter container of something you may use once or twice, and then you have to toss it out. Go to the grocery these days, everything's expensive, man. I see the prices. I try my best to not have people buy stuff that they won't ever use over and over again.
So you've mentioned a few times different, things that were accessible. So the Caribbean, most of us will be familiar with the fact that it's a series of islands, right? So when you're on an island, that restricts depending on the size of the island and where it is, what you can grow. It restricts what you can import. So what sorts of things are native to the islands and what sorts of things have had to be imported? Like, how does that influence the cuisine?
Also, because so much of your agriculture was influenced by colonizers coming in and putting in sugarcane crops, it's hard to tell how much was lost, but like I'm sure there must have been a reduction in sort of what sort of things were available.
I'm not that old, Erin, so I can't go back that far.
But you seem to know all the history.
No, you're right. And so what we found, and I'm only now seeing a revival of, is most of the native, like the Caribs and the Arawaks, Tianos, all the people, all the First Nations who migrated from South America up the Orinoco into the Caribbean, that culture was almost erased. But now, with this new way of thinking and looking, and I think it may have stemmed from some of the natural medicines and stuff like that. People are getting back into that stuff, and more people are doing research and stuff into it. So there's a market I go to when I'm in Trinidad and Tobago. It's called the green market, where everything is organic. And I met an elder there of the Carib community, Carib. And one of the things he was explaining to me is while Guyana is known for casserip, and casserip is this, it's like a molasses syrup they make from cooking down cassava, manioc. The most popular dish at Christmas time in Guyana is pepper pot. And what it is a big stew with a whole bunch of different meats and stuff in there. And the base is this casserip. And they would have it simmering on the stove from Christmas morning all the way into the new year. And they would, every morning, they would take some with some bread and dip and eat with the meats and stuff like that. And he was telling me that while we know Guyana being the ones who use it, it's been in our culture in Trinidad and Tobago for centuries as well, too. And he was explaining to me some of the other indigenous foods and stuff like that. It would have been renamed as well. So not only do the colonizers force religion onto you, change your culture, they changed the names as well of stuff, whatever was easier for them to say and pronounce and stuff like that. Right. So there's a revival of that. But to answer your question, the other part about importing food, I remember when we were small, at Christmas time was the only time we would get grapes and apples and pears and dates. That's the only time we would get those sort of fruits. But any tropical fruit or vegetable you can think about, we pretty much have it in one way or the other throughout the Caribbean. So now, anything you can think about, you can get it because it's imported. The sad part about it is not only are we importing those foods, we're also importing fast foods. So I'm glad we're starting to look back at our past and try to use some of the stuff that was indigenous to the Caribbean.
What about all those hot peppers? I think when we think Caribbean food, we often think, ooh, there's a lot of spice in there. Does that grow? Is that indigenous to the islands?
Yeah, one of the things, when people say spicy, I automatically go to like a curry or something like that. At one point, the Trinidad Moruga scorpion was the hottest pepper in the world. And then the Carolina Reaper, I think, came on board. And I think there's another one that came on board. But what people don't realize is no genetics was played around with the Trinidad Moruga scorpion. It was a natural pepper that grew in Trinidad and Tobago. The hot stuff is natural to the Caribbean, mind you. Seeds could have been brought from India way back when, because remember when the East Indian indentured laborers came, they would have brought seeds and stuff as well too. So most, if not all, of the peppers would have had a long, long history in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, speaking about peppers, I remember about 5 years ago, I was down in the Caribbean. My dad has a small garden, and under a plantain tree, he had a pepper tree there that had these little tiny little, what most people would call bird's eye pepper. But my dad said, he calls it kiskini pepper. Isn't that a bird? He goes, yeah, the kiskini bird feeds on this pepper. And he said, sometimes you can be in the middle of the forest and there will be a tree. He says, because the droppings, wherever the droppings fell, that tree will grow up. He said he never planted that tree there. It's a bird that took a poop, and there's that tree. So we're eating bird poop peppers. I was like, okay.
That's fun for kids. Kids like this to call things. It's cute.
You shared with us this fantastic recipe, chicken pilau, and we're going to come back in the second half and talk about the recipe and our experience with cooking it and get some more insight from you.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
By the way, it's my all-time favorite Caribbean dish, chicken pilau. Yeah.
I can see why. I can see why. It's a winner. Hey listeners, thanks so much for joining us on this great episode with our fabulous guest, Chris De La Rosa. All of the recipes that we talk about today are going to be found on his website, caribbeanpot.com. And because of our conversation with Chris, he's gone on and written a small batch recipe for his Caribbean green seasoning. His website has great pictures and instructions that will help you as you cook and explore this new cuisine. And so we really encourage you to go check it out and bring Caribbean cuisine into your kitchen. Now, back to our interview. Welcome back. We are here to talk about chicken pilau. And because I didn't know how to spell this when you first spoke about it with us, I'm going to say it's Pelau because I was way off. So if anyone wants to just Google it and they, as they're listening to us. Yeah.
Well, what you're going to do is go to Chris's website, caribbeanpot.com, and you're going to look it up. That's where you're going to go for all the things pilau, not just chicken. There's like short rib. There was
a seafood one. There was a shrimp. I think I did a vegan one, a gluten-free one, beef, any sort of protein or non-protein. You can make a pilau out of it. It's just when you add the protein, you obviously won't add the fish or the lobster or whatever it is early because then it'll overcook, and I don't want you doing that. But you would add it later on in the process. The sort of key in making pilau, and I'm sure you guys would have come across that, is some people say you burn sugar, but technically you're not burning the sugar to start with. You're caramelizing it, because if you burn the sugar, what happens is it will go black, and then the entire dish would be bitter. It will be bitter tasting. It won't be edible at all. So at that point, if you do find you go over, stop, let it cool completely, wash the pot, and start back. Because if you add water to that molten sugar caramel base, you're looking for problems, man. You're going to get burned for sure.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Yeah.
No, there's a cheap way of doing it, and I've seen some people do it while it's not traditional, is add the oil to the pot, add the seasoned chicken, let it cook without adding the sugar. But later on, you add a bit of dark soy sauce and what's called browning. You got to go to the Caribbean store, and it's the same burnt sugar in a liquid form, and you would add some.
Oh, is that what browning liquid is?
Yeah.
I've seen browning liquid at the store.
Yeah, it's pretty much caramelized sugar that they add water to, and they make a liquid out of it. And it's a key ingredient in, everybody knows, or they should know about the Caribbean rum cake or black cake at Christmas time. That is where it gets most of its color from. That along with some molasses. So that is where you get that deep, dark color from.
Ooh.
Okay. Yeah, so this recipe, if we're going to go step by step, we'll probably be here all day because I know you can talk about this. I watched your video where you had, I think, 6 or 7 tips for pilau. So maybe you could give us the condensed version of what are those key steps for a fantastic pilau?
In my humble opinion, and the recipe varies throughout the Caribbean. I think step 1, you must put coconut milk. You must have coconut milk, whether it's from powder that you rehydrate with water, whether it's from a can, or if you're in the Caribbean or you have access to dry coconuts, you would grate it and squeeze the milk out of the grated coconut. It must be a dry coconut. I think seasoning whatever protein that you're using and allowing it to marinate for at least a couple hours, that is key as well. The sort of third thing is the browning process. The other thing people look at with your pilau, and you're judged on it if it's in a public place, is the color of it. And this is where the color comes from. in making pilau. A nice dark pilau is what a lot of people like. If it's pale, they'll say, "Yo, man, that pilau needs a tan. You need to tan that thing." So you need to get the browning part right. Nobody wants tough meat either. So if you're, like if you're cooking a chicken pilau versus a beef pilau, the initial part where you're cooking the protein, which would be the beef or the chicken, will vary. The chicken cooks quicker, obviously. So you cook it maybe 10 minutes and then you add the rice and the other ingredients along with the coconut milk. But if it's beef or pork or the ribs that you spoke about, you will braise that for about 45 minutes to an hour first. So be mindful that you don't want people, it's not Wrigley's. We're not trying to have chewing gum. We want something that's nice and tender and falling off the bones, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rice you use is totally up to you, but I like a long grain parboiled rice. So a lot of people like basmati. Whatever rice you have, just remember the amount of liquid you put in there has to be dependent on the type of rice that you use as well, too, because I find the long grain parboiled takes a bit more liquid. A lot of people ask, well, Chris, instead of water and coconut milk, can we use stock? Yes, you can. Traditionally, we never use stock in the Caribbean. Stock was never an option. So I like it old school. I like that traditional way. It will change the finished product as well, too, if you use that. Before we get to the texture part of it, the last sort of tip is don't be afraid to end with some herbs as well, too. So whether it is some parsley, my mom, and she's passed that on to me, is we like using chopped celery leaves. It gives that little pop at the end kind of thing. And you mix it in there, you turn the stove off and you leave it. I spoke about it earlier, and this one here, people argue and fight about it, is the final texture of it. In Jamaica, they have a word for grainy, which is, they say shelly. A lot of people like the rice shelly or grainy, and that's what we call a dry pilau. Mm-hmm. I always thought my daughters loved it the way I made it, until one day we were at my cousin's house, and my cousin made this runny, soupy kind of pilau there, and my daughter's like, Auntie Sophie, this is the best pilau we've ever tasted. Now, I wanted to leave them there. They would have had to walk home. I was like, I'm sitting right here. How are you going to say that, man? Wait till I leave the room.
Could send daggers, right?
Yeah. Suffice to say, we make wet pilau in the house now as well, too, because, at the end of the day, I cook for the people around me kind of thing. So I have had to adjust to that.
So I have a question then. So to change the texture, are you adding more liquid, or are you taking it off the stove earlier so it doesn't dry out as much? How are you changing it?
So the recipe on the website that I have, I think that one is for a dry pilau. So I tell people, if you want it more wet, you would add more water or more coconut milk to it to give it that liquid kind of state. Now, keep in mind, the longer it remains in the pot, even after you're done cooking, the rice will keep sucking in that juice as well, too. So to get that wet pilau, you need to enjoy it maybe at least the first half an hour after it's done cooking.
Right.
At the bottom, because we started with sugar and we add coconut milk, the sugars tend to not necessarily burn, but form a crust on the bottom, the very bottom where the flame hits the pot. That is called bun, that dark, almost crusty. And that is my favorite part of the pilau. People fight for that as well, too. So you'd see people would move aside, move the stuff around, and go dig in the center to get that bun, man.
So to create the bon, you don't want to stir it too much.
No, and that's the other thing. If you want a dry pilau, don't overstir it, because the more those rice grains rub against each other, starch is going to be released, and that is what's going to create that wet, sappy sort of texture at the end kind of thing. And the thing about pilau, Erin and Heather, is one of the favorite ways I enjoyed, and it takes me back to being a little boy on the islands. While we were surrounded by water and beaches, beautiful beaches, going to the beach wasn't a regular occurrence. It was an event for us. And Mommy would always cook a big pot of chicken pilau, and we'd go swimming when we went to the ocean. And when we came back to the car, there would be pilau waiting for us. So that memory of and sometimes it's not just the meal itself, but who's there with you and the environment around you. And it's always, all those things add to how much you enjoy something. The who, the where, the when, the smell of the ocean and stuff like that. And just as important as whether or not you like it wet or dry, if you like the bun, there's also the sides to it. Traditionally, it would be a basic salad of cucumber and tomato. Mommy always had watercress, huge slices of avocado, something like a pepper sauce. And on the side, there's always something on the side because mommy didn't cook food spicy, Heather, because as kids, we didn't want spicy. Yeah. But you had the option. This is why pepper sauce is so popular in the Caribbean. Every island has their own take on pepper sauce as well, too. And there's always be something on the side. For me, personally, my side of choice, and while today I notice a lot of people love coleslaw, I enjoy what's called tomato choka, and that is fire-roasted tomatoes crushed with garlic and Scotch bonnet pepper with a little bit of salt. Everything's crushed into like a salsa, a roasted tomato salsa. But then we put thin onions on top, and then we would heat some oil and pour it onto the onions, which would then flavor the tomato base. That step, that process is called chunky, when you temper with that hot oil and you mix it up. And I just love that as my side to my pelau. I tell people that, and sometimes, really? You sure about that, boy? I'm like, yeah, man, you have to try it.
Oh, it sounds good. We didn't have time. We were a little short on time when we made our pilau, so we didn't have time to do any extra stuff. But next time, that sounds delicious.
And you can control the level of heat with anything you cook. And this is what I tell people. At the end of the day, I'm giving you a map. You can read the map however you want. Just use it as a guide to whatever the dish is. It's all about personalizing and finding that sort of comfort zone that when you eat it, when you enjoy it, when your children or your family, or maybe you take it to work for your co-workers, they're like, wow, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I do have to admit that we were afraid of the Scotch bonnet. We did not dive in 100% because we were a little bit timid about using.
You're looking at us two white girls here. That sounds scary to us. But you know what? I think we talked about this just before you came on the call with us, Chris. Is our families were like, you should have done the pepper. Like, we needed more. We want the heat. Even my kids. My youngest, he put chili crisp, the Chinese chili crisp on it, because he was like, I need some spice, Mom. And I was like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It had a ton of flavor, but we didn't have that heat. And we all agreed that the heat was missing. And so we weren't sure if we should have used a different pepper or if we should have just gone in with that Scotch bonnet. I don't know.
I think safely, a habanero is a beautiful starting point with hot peppers, because you get that heat, but you also get a fruitiness about it. So I always recommend a habanero is easier to get now than any other pepper, I think, when it comes to high heat peppers. There's always jalapeno, but I find with jalapenos, it's hit and miss. Sometimes it has a kick to it, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes they can be very bland.
But again, if you served it with pepper sauce, rather than reaching for the chili crisps, Mr. could have gone for the pepper sauce, right? So I'm making a pepper jelly after this call. I have it all set up.
Ooh.
We were at a local vineyard here in Hamilton, well, more closer to Niagara Falls, and I got Concord grapes. So I'm going to do a Concord grape pepper jelly today. So I'm doing that. I'm shooting 2 videos today, that, and I'm doing chicken livers.
Oh.
And speaking of chicken livers, what I must mention about Caribbean cuisine is that we use the entire animal. I mean, the entire animal. We pay respect to that animal by we're gonna hurt you. We're gonna put you in a pot. We're gonna eat all of you, kind of thing. So you will find some recipes that has intestines and liver and hearts and gizzards and stuff like that. But again, during slavery days, what you had is what you cooked and what you ate, right? So we took humble ingredients and we just added our flair to it and made everything delicious.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's funny though how just about every old culture there is a one-pot rice dish, from biryani to paella to everybody has that one-pot rice dish, man.
Yeah, that's where people are going to argue about what it's called.
Everybody has this take on this one pot rice dish, and both Heather and I were saying, like, we find rice one of the hardest things to cook well. to get the finish that you want. And it's interesting how all these different cultures have these different takes on what types of rice and how it's made. And
yeah,
this is that one pot rice dish that's just, it's got all the good stuff in there.
Yeah, the thing with the pilau as well, and you'll find it in most of these one pot rice dishes. It's a way for mommy. It was a way for her to sneak carrots, pigeon peas, all these different things into the dish, and it became part of the dish. So we were eating it, and we weren't complaining. I don't want carrots, and I don't want it. Well, it's in there, and you're eating it too, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So
yes, that's true, because they're not going to complain when it's all.
Yeah.
You can't pick it out and identify different things, right?
My one son doesn't like the texture of any beans or peas or whatever, but he ate these pigeon peas without noticing they were even in there. And I was like, I'm going to buy myself a case of those.
In Trinidad, they grow pigeon peas as well too.
Oh,
so
cool.
the fresh is totally different than the stuff in the can. But like you guys, that is what I have available to me, so I have no choice but to use it. You can also find it at Asian markets in the frozen section. So if you go to a place that sells like in East Indian stuff, because they use it over in India. It's from out there, I would believe, as well too.
Okay.
All I would recommend doing is with that one, if you got the frozen one, put it in a pot with water about 2 or 3 inches above it. Boil it for half an hour, dump that water out, do it again for about 20 minutes. What I find with the frozen pigeon peas is that it has a tiny bitterness to it that may influence the overall taste of it. So you really want to do that. And you will see the pot that you boil it in, there will be a ring. And it's a sort of a sap ring around the surface where the water level started at. And that is the sort of, maybe that's what's causing the bitterness in the frozen pigeon peas.
Oh, interesting.
In Jamaica, they call pigeon peas gongo beans, and they use it for their rice and peas as well. So if you watch a traditional Jamaican rice and peas, it is actual peas. This is where the name comes from, but a lot that has evolved over the years, and people use red beans, red kidney beans in there. So you're like, you're telling me this is rice and peas, but I'm seeing red kidney beans in there. That's one of the most common questions I get on CaribbeanPot.com in regards to Jamaican rice and peas. What I must mention, Erin and Heather, earlier on we spoke about where the food and the love for food and cooking and sharing and everything started from. I'm heavily influenced by my great-grandmothers as well. On my mother's side, my grandmother, she was 99. On my father's side, she was 104. So those girls, they were around for a while. So obviously I would have picked up some stuff from her. Every village had a village store. We call it a shop. And she would send me up the road to go buy whatever for her, whether it's salted pigtail or salted cod or kerosene for her stove. I always met a friend, and I always forgot what she sent me for. So I had to come back home, ask her again, and then go back to the store again. So I always found myself going back, and it was an ongoing thing with me and her, man.
Poor Granny. He's like, oh, this boy. He's always forgetting.
Never gonna get me what I need.
That's cute. I love those stories. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find and follow you and we didn't even mention your cookbook. You also have a cookbook. Tell us all where we can find all this stuff.
The cookbook is only in digital format right now. So everything we spoke about today, everything I've been doing can be found via CaribbeanPot.com. You go over there and you will find links to all my socials. So it would be facebook.com/realcaribbeanpot. On Twitter, I am known as Obzokee, Obzokee, and Obzokee just means not normal, bent out of shape. It's a local word, and I love using local words in a lot of what I do. On YouTube, youtube.com/CaribbeanPot. On Instagram, it would be @CaribbeanPot. On TikTok, well, I'm new to TikTok, relatively new, @CaribbeanPot as well. So everything is there. At CaribbeanPot.com, you will find my cookbook. It's a Gourmand Award winner, which is like the Oscars for cookbooks. And I did it all by myself. This is self-published. I had great people with me, an excellent editor, graphic designer, and I'm always thankful for my team. Unfortunately, the person who spearheaded it, Karen Nicole Smith, she's no longer with us, but she is missed terribly. A lot of what I do, you would see reflections of her in what I do and how I present myself. At CaribbeanPot.com, you'll find a cookbook, The Vibrant Caribbean Pot, 100 Traditional and Fusion Recipes. No longer available in physical format, but you can buy it in digital format. Everything you can find there. And I welcome people to come on there, interact with me. While I can't guarantee I'm going to respond to you immediately, at some point or the other, I will respond to you, because that is that sort of connection that I've tried to foster over the years. This is why I started a new series on Instagram called Ask Uncle Chris, because I want to address, because sometimes the same question pops up many times. Mm-hmm. So by addressing the question, I'm like, you know what, go over there. It's answered over there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, listening to you talk about how many people are contacting you all the time, I feel extremely grateful and honored that you joined us here on our podcast, because we're not Nigella Lawson. So But when we see what you're doing, and it really spoke to us, because that is exactly what we're trying to do, which is to encourage home cooks just like us, who maybe are just learning as we go. Maybe we don't have a granny to learn from, but we love food and we want to learn how to cook it, and we want to learn from all the cultures. We see this amazing food that folks like you are preparing. Mm-hmm. And we want to do it too. And so we're just so grateful that you came and shared this with us. And we can't wait to get more into Caribbean cooking. And we hope all our listeners learn something and are coming along with us on this fun journey.
Yeah, Heather, Erin, when you guys at Three Kitchen Podcast reached out to me, any opportunity, and there's a genuine love for my culture in everything that I do. So having the opportunity to share what I know with you all, share a little bit about the history and the food, and connect with an audience that may never have come across Caribbean food, and introduce them via your podcast. That's a win for me. It's a win for Caribbean culinary culture. It's a win for everybody in Canada, because I strongly believe that by learning about each other culture, whether it's food or dance or music or whatever it is, it kind of allows us to look inside each other's way of doing things and living, and then it opens up doors which typically wouldn't have been. Old school immigration was all about communities within communities, and this is why you would have some of the older cities would have a Chinatown, an Italian neighborhood, a Greek neighborhood, and stuff like that. It kept us from growing as a people, as a country, and stuff like that. So if it's via food that we can come together and share a meal, and you're like, this is from Chris, he's from Trinidad, and right away you've already introduced Trinidad and Tobago to your family or a friend or whoever it is, whether it's Jamaica, Cuba. I've barely touched the surface of Caribbean food. You will notice that the Dutch Caribbean is not represented on my website. The French Caribbean, very small amount of food. The Spanish-speaking Caribbean, a very small amount of food. So there's so much I want to put out there. Yeah, the opportunity to work with you guys and put this out there, I thank you very much.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. I can't wait to do more. This is fantastic that you could share your culture and your food with us and everybody else.
I have fun. I truly do have fun.
Once again, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun, and it's been a real pleasure meeting you, and can't wait to keep following along with what you're cooking next.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'm truly grateful.
And now for the fine print. Join us over on the socials: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website at threekitchenspodcast.com. Remember, when you like, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review, it helps more people find us. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are. What happened?
I'm still learning over here.